The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in courtroom 12B as 17-year-old Maya Washington sat quietly in the defendant's section. She wore deliberately mismatched clothes. Baggy jeans hanging low on her hips, a wrinkled t-shirt with a cartoon character, and scuffed sneakers with untied laces. Her hair was styled messily, with strands falling across her face as she kept her eyes down, occasionally fidgeting with her phone. Judge Richard Harrison, a man in his 60s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looked down from his elevated bench with obvious disapproval. The morning had already been long, filled with the usual parade of juvenile offenders, and his patience was wearing thin. "Miss Washington," Judge Harrison called out, his voice carrying a hint of mockery. "Perhaps you could do us all the courtesy of putting away your phone and paying attention to these proceedings." Maya slowly tucked the phone into her pocket, maintaining the perfect image of a disinterested teenager. Around her, the courtroom was filling up with the usual morning crowd: tired public defenders, stern-faced prosecutors, anxious parents, and bored court officers. "Now then," the judge continued, picking up Maya's file, "I see we have another case of shoplifting. How original." His sarcasm drew a few chuckles from the court officers. "Tell me, Miss Washington, do you think the rules simply don't apply to you?" Maya remained silent, but her dark eyes carefully tracked every movement in the courtroom. Nobody noticed how she subtly pressed the record button on her smartwatch, or how her seemingly casual posture allowed her to observe everyone's reactions. "Your Honor," the public defender assigned to Maya's case spoke up, "my client is a first-time offender, and the value of the merchandise in question was minimal." Judge Harrison waved his hand dismissively. Yes, I've heard it all before." He peered down at Maya over his glasses. "I see you attend Lincoln High School. Your grades are—" He paused, shuffling through papers. "Mediocre at best. No extracurricular activities except for what appears to be a failed attempt at the debate club." The carefully crafted fake school records had done their job. Maya let her shoulders slump slightly, playing perfectly into the judge's preconceptions. "You know," Judge Harrison leaned forward, his tone becoming increasingly condescending, "I see kids like you every day. You think the world owes you something. You don't apply yourself in school, you don't respect authority, and then you expect leniency when you break the law." The public defender tried to interject again, but the judge silenced him with a stern look. "Tell me, Miss Washington, can you even name the 3 branches of government? Do you have any understanding of the legal system you're so casually disrespecting?" Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably at the judge's tone, but no one spoke up. Maya noticed a young court reporter frowning as she typed, clearly disturbed by the judge's behavior. What no one in the courtroom knew was that beneath Maya's carefully disheveled appearance lay a mind that had graduated high school at 13, completed law school by 16, and passed the bar exam with the highest scores in the state's history. The seemingly worthless phone in her pocket was actually recording every word, adding to months of carefully gathered evidence. The judge continued his lecture, each word digging him deeper into the trap Maya had methodically set. "Perhaps some time in juvenile detention will help you appreciate the seriousness of your actions. Maybe then you'll learn that actions have consequences." Maya's public defender stood up again. "Your Honor, given that this is a first offense, we'd like to request." Request denied. Judge Harrison cut him off sharply. "I'm tired of seeing these kids come through here thinking they can just—" A subtle smile played at the corners of Maya's mouth as the judge continued his tirade. Every word, every dismissive gesture, every biased assumption was being recorded and documented. This performance had taken months to set up, involving cooperation from civil rights organizations, carefully crafted false records, and meticulous planning. As the morning session continued, other cases were called, but Judge Harrison kept returning to Maya, making her an example of everything he thought was wrong with today's youth. Little did he know that every discriminatory remark, every procedural violation, every instance of bias was being carefully noted by the young legal prodigy sitting before him. The next day's proceedings would shock everyone in courtroom 12B, but for now, Maya Washington maintained her role perfectly. Just another teenager in trouble with the law, exactly what Judge Harrison expected to see. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in courtroom 12B as 17-year-old Maya Washington sat quietly in the defendant's section. She wore deliberately mismatched clothes. Baggy jeans hanging low on her hips, a wrinkled t-shirt with a cartoon character, and scuffed sneakers with untied laces. Her hair was styled messily, with strands falling across her face as she kept her eyes down, occasionally fidgeting with her phone. Judge Richard Harrison, a man in his 60s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looked down from his elevated bench with obvious disapproval. The morning had already been long, filled with the usual parade of juvenile offenders, and his patience was wearing thin. "Miss Washington," Judge Harrison called out, his voice carrying a hint of mockery. "Perhaps you could do us all the courtesy of putting away your phone and paying attention to these proceedings." Maya slowly tucked the phone into her pocket, maintaining the perfect image of a disinterested teenager. Around her, the courtroom was filling up with the usual morning crowd: tired public defenders, stern-faced prosecutors, anxious parents, and bored court officers. "Now then," the judge continued, picking up Maya's file, "I see we have another case of shoplifting. How original." His sarcasm drew a few chuckles from the court officers. "Tell me, Miss Washington, do you think the rules simply don't apply to you?" Maya remained silent, but her dark eyes carefully tracked every movement in the courtroom. Nobody noticed how she subtly pressed the record button on her smartwatch, or how her seemingly casual posture allowed her to observe everyone's reactions. "Your Honor," the public defender assigned to Maya's case spoke up, "my client is a first-time offender, and the value of the merchandise in question was minimal." Judge Harrison waved his hand dismissively. Yes, I've heard it all before." He peered down at Maya over his glasses. "I see you attend Lincoln High School. Your grades are—" He paused, shuffling through papers, "mediocre at best. No extracurricular activities except for what appears to be a failed attempt at the debate club." The carefully crafted fake school records had done their job. Maya let her shoulders slump slightly, playing perfectly into the judge's preconceptions. "You know," Judge Harrison leaned forward, his tone becoming increasingly condescending, "I see kids like you every day. You think the world owes you something. You don't apply yourself in school, you don't respect authority, and then you expect leniency when you break the law." The public defender tried to interject again, but the judge silenced him with a stern look. "Tell me, Miss Washington, can you even name the 3 branches of government? Do you have any understanding of the legal system you're so casually disrespecting?" Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably at the judge's tone, but no one spoke up. Maya noticed a young court reporter frowning as she typed, clearly disturbed by the judge's behavior. What no one in the courtroom knew was that beneath Maya's carefully disheveled appearance lay a mind that had graduated high school at 13, completed law school by 16, and passed the bar exam with the highest scores in the state's history. The seemingly worthless phone in her pocket was actually recording every word, adding to months of carefully gathered evidence. The judge continued his lecture, each word digging him deeper into the trap Maya had methodically set. "Perhaps some time in juvenile detention will help you appreciate the seriousness of your actions. Maybe then you'll learn that actions have consequences." Maya's public defender stood up again. "Your Honor, given that this is a first offense, we'd like to request." Request denied. Judge Harrison cut him off sharply. "I'm tired of seeing these kids come through here thinking they can just—" A subtle smile played at the corners of Maya's mouth as the judge continued his tirade. Every word, every dismissive gesture, every biased assumption was being recorded and documented. This performance had taken months to set up, involving cooperation from civil rights organizations, carefully crafted false records, and meticulous planning. As the morning session continued, other cases were called, but Judge Harrison kept returning to Maya, making her an example of everything he thought was wrong with today's youth. Little did he know that every discriminatory remark, every procedural violation, every instance of bias was being carefully noted by the young legal prodigy sitting before him. The next day's proceedings would shock everyone in courtroom 12B, but for now, Maya Washington maintained her role perfectly, just another teenager in trouble with the law, exactly what Judge Harrison expected to see. The next morning's session in courtroom 12B started just like any other. Maya arrived early, once again dressed in her carefully chosen troubled teen outfit. This time, she added a pair of oversized headphones around her neck, which secretly contained additional recording equipment. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom at precisely 9 o'clock a.m., his black robe swishing as he took his seat at the bench. His eyes immediately found Maya in the defendant's section, and his lips curled into a now familiar look of disapproval. "Miss Washington," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I see you've graced us with your presence again. And wearing those headphones in my courtroom. Really?" Maya slowly removed the headphones, hiding a small smile as she knew they had already served their purpose. The morning's proceedings began, and she watched as Judge Harrison handled several cases before hers. His pattern was clear. White teenagers received warnings and community service, while minorities consistently faced detention time. "Your Honor." Maya's assigned public defender stood up when her case was called. Regarding the shoplifting charges against Miss Washington, Judge Harrison cut him off. Yes, I've made my position clear yesterday. This kind of behavior needs serious consequences." He shuffled through some papers on his desk. "In fact, I've been reviewing Miss Washington's school records more thoroughly. Multiple tardies, mediocre grades, and a general lack of respect for authority." Maya's public defender tried again. "Your Honor, if I may point out that my client has no prior record." "Probably just hasn't been caught before," the judge interrupted. "I've seen enough of these cases to know the pattern. These kids think they can just walk into stores and take whatever they want." As the judge continued his biased monologue, Maya noticed several key moments unfolding around the courtroom. The young court reporter was typing with increasing discomfort, clearly troubled by the judge's words. A few attorneys waiting for their cases watched with concerned expressions. Even some of the court officers shifted uncomfortably. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, leaning forward, "I think it's time someone taught you about respect for the law. Do you even understand the seriousness of these proceedings? Do you comprehend the basic principles of our legal system?" Maya kept her eyes down, but her mind was racing. Every word the judge spoke was another nail in the coffin of his career. His bias wasn't subtle anymore. It was blatant, as if he felt completely secure in his position of power. The public defender made one last attempt. "Your Honor, given the circumstances and the value of the allegedly stolen items." "Allegedly," Judge Harrison scoffed. "The security camera footage is clear, though I doubt Miss Washington here even understands the concept of evidence. Tell me, young lady, do you know what evidence means in a court of law?" The moment was perfect. Maya had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening, but she held her position, knowing that timing was everything. She needed just a few more minutes of the judge's prejudiced behavior for the record. Around the courtroom, more people were beginning to pay attention. The judge's tone had grown increasingly hostile, and the racial undertones in his comments were becoming impossible to ignore. Several attorneys who had cases that morning were now watching intently, some taking notes. "I think," Judge Harrison declared, "that 6 months in juvenile detention might help adjust your attitude. Maybe then you'll learn to respect the law and this court." Maya's hand moved slowly to her briefcase, but she waited. The judge wasn't quite finished. "It's sad, really," he continued, addressing the entire courtroom now. "When I see young people like this, with no respect for authority, no understanding of consequences, this is what's wrong with society today. These children think they can just..." As Judge Harrison continued his speech, Maya could see her team quietly entering the back of the courtroom. Everything was in place. The recording devices had captured hours of biased behavior. The statistical evidence was ready. The media had been notified. In just a few moments, she would reveal her true identity, but for now, she let the judge continue digging his own professional grave. Each word he spoke would be analyzed in the coming weeks by judicial review boards, civil rights organizations, and media outlets across the country. The case was about to unfold in a way that would shock everyone in courtroom 12B, everyone except the brilliant young attorney who had orchestrated it all. The tension in courtroom 12B had reached its peak as Judge Harrison finished his lengthy speech about youth these days. Maya's moment had finally arrived. With deliberate slowness, she stood up, her demeanor transforming before everyone's eyes. "Your Honor," Maya spoke, her voice clear and confident, completely different from her previous mumbled responses. "Before you proceed with sentencing, I believe there are some matters we need to address." Judge Harrison's face reddened. "Sit down, Miss Washington. You speak when I ask you to speak." "Actually, Your Honor," Maya continued, reaching into her briefcase, I have standing to speak in this court. She pulled out her bar card and legal credentials. I am Maya Washington, Esquire, member in good standing of the State Bar Association, and licensed to practice law in this jurisdiction. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Harrison's mouth fell open, his face cycling through shades of red to pale white. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keyboard, and the bailiff took an unconscious step forward. This is preposterous. Judge Harrison sputtered. Some kind of joke. Maya was already walking toward the bench, her teenage slouch replaced by the confident stride of a seasoned attorney. I can assure you, Your Honor, this is no joke. She handed her credentials to the clerk, who examined them with wide eyes. These appear to be genuine, Your Honor, the clerk stammered. Maya turned to face the gallery, where her team was now standing. For the record, I am here representing the Equal Justice Initiative. Over the past 6 months, we have been conducting a thorough investigation into patterns of discriminatory sentencing in this court. Judge Harrison gripped his gavel tightly. This is outrageous. I'll have you disbarred for this deception. With all due respect, Your Honor, Maya replied calmly, no deception has occurred. I never misrepresented myself to this court. You made assumptions based on my age and appearance, assumptions that have now been proven incorrect. She motioned to her team, who began distributing documents to the court clerk and other attorneys present. What we have here is extensive documentation of systematic bias in your sentencing practices. Statistical analysis shows that you consistently impose harsher sentences on minority defendants compared to white defendants for identical offenses. The courtroom was dead silent now, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. Several attorneys who had been waiting for their cases were now frantically taking notes or recording on their phones. Furthermore, Maya continued, pulling out a small device, we have audio recordings from the past 2 days that demonstrate clear prejudicial behavior and violations of judicial conduct codes. Judge Harrison's face had turned ashen. This is a setup. No, Your Honor, Maya replied firmly. This is accountability. The role of a judge is to apply the law fairly and impartially. Your pattern of discriminatory sentencing has affected hundreds of young lives. She turned to address the gallery directly, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. For those present, I am announcing that the Equal Justice Initiative will be filing a formal complaint with the state's Judicial Review Board. We will also be requesting a review of all juvenile cases handled by this court over the past 5 years. The young court reporter had tears in her eyes, clearly moved by the moment. Several attorneys in the gallery had pulled out their phones, though not to record. They were already calling their offices about cases they had lost in front of Judge Harrison. This is not just about one judge or one court, Maya continued. This is about addressing systemic bias in our juvenile justice system. Every young person who comes before this bench deserves equal treatment under the law, regardless of their race, appearance, or background. Judge Harrison seemed to have aged 10 years in the past few minutes. His hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. This proceeding is adjourned, he managed to croak out. Actually, Your Honor, Maya replied, we're not finished. There are several motions I'd like to file regarding current juvenile detention cases. She pulled out another stack of documents from her briefcase. And given the circumstances, I believe it would be appropriate for you to recuse yourself from hearing these motions. The gallery erupted in murmurs again as reality sank in. The 17-year-old defendant hadn't just exposed one instance of bias, she had orchestrated a complete challenge to the system itself. Maya Washington, the youngest attorney in the state's history, stood tall in courtroom 12B, ready to continue her fight for justice. The revelation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. The following day, courtroom 12B was packed to capacity. News of Maya's revelation had spread like wildfire through legal circles, and now attorneys, activists, and journalists filled every available seat. The tension in the air was electric as Maya, now dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, stood at the prosecutor's table. Judge Harrison had refused to recuse himself, a decision that played directly into Maya's strategy. He sat at his bench, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled anger as Maya began her presentation. Your Honor, and members of the press, Maya began, her voice steady and clear, I would like to present evidence of systematic discrimination in this court's handling of juvenile cases. She activated a large screen that her team had set up. Over the past 5 years, she continued, pointing to a series of graphs, African American juveniles in your court received sentences averaging 180 days for first-time offenses, while white juveniles received an average of 60 days for identical crimes. Judge Harrison's knuckles turned white as he gripped his desk. These statistics can be interpreted in many ways, Ms. Washington. Indeed, they can, Your Honor, Maya replied smoothly. Which is why we also have audio recordings, transcripts, and witness testimonies. She played selected clips from the previous day's proceedings, the judge's own voice filling the courtroom with its condescending tones. The evidence was damning. Case after case showed the pattern: minority youths receiving harsh sentences, while white defendants walked away with warnings. Maya's presentation was methodical, each point building upon the last like a perfectly constructed legal argument. Furthermore, Maya continued, pulling up another document. We have identified 47 instances where you made discriminatory remarks from the bench, similar to those directed at me yesterday. A young boy in the gallery stood up, one of Judge Harrison's previous defendants. He told me I'd never amount to anything, the boy said loudly. Others began to stand as well, each with their own story of prejudice and harsh treatment. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly. Order. I will have order in this court. Your Honor. Maya's voice cut through the chaos. These are the real faces of injustice. Each person here represents a life affected by biased sentencing practices. She turned to face the packed gallery. These young people weren't given a chance. They were judged not by their actions, but by their appearance, their race, their economic status. Judge Harrison's face had turned purple. This is a mockery of justice. You orchestrated this entire situation. No, Your Honor, Maya replied calmly. You orchestrated it through years of discriminatory practices. I merely documented it. She approached the bench, laying down a thick folder. This contains formal complaints from 53 families whose children were sentenced in your court. Each case shows a clear pattern of bias when compared to similar cases involving white defendants. The journalists in the room were frantically taking notes. Several TV news cameras have been allowed in, capturing every moment of this historic confrontation. You can't possibly expect these complaints to be taken seriously, Judge Harrison sputtered. You deceived this court. Maya stood her ground. I presented myself exactly as I am, a qualified attorney gathering evidence of judicial misconduct. Your assumptions about my capabilities based on my age and race only proved our point. She turned back to address the gallery. This isn't just about one judge or one courtroom. This is about a system that allows prejudice to masquerade as justice. Today, we're not just presenting evidence, we're demanding change. The room erupted in applause, which the bailiff struggled to quiet. Judge Harrison's face had gone from purple to ashen gray as he realized the full impact of what was happening. I am hereby filing a motion for immediate review of all juvenile sentences handed down by this court in the past 5 years, Maya announced, handing another document to the clerk. We're also requesting an emergency hearing with the Judicial Review Board. She faced Judge Harrison one final time. Your Honor, you asked me yesterday if I understood the principles of our legal system. I do. Justice must be blind to color, to age, to appearance. When it isn't justice at all. The confrontation had reached its climax. In less than 48 hours, Maya Washington had transformed from a supposed teenage defendant to the architect of one of the most significant challenges to judicial bias in the state's history. As reporters rushed to file their stories and activists began organizing outside the courthouse, one thing was clear. Courtroom 12B would never be the same again. Within hours of Maya's courtroom confrontation, the story exploded across every major news network. Television vans with tall satellite antennas crowded the courthouse parking lot, and reporters jostled for position on the court. Breaking news. Teen attorney exposes racist judge, scrolled across the bottom of TV screens nationwide. Social media platforms erupted with viral clips of Maya's revelation in court, with millions of shares and comments pouring in by the minute. Maya stood at the top of the courthouse steps, surrounded by her legal team and supporters. Camera flashes burst like lightning as she approached the forest of microphones. What we uncovered in Judge Harrison's courtroom, she began, her voice steady and clear, is not an isolated incident. This is a symptom of a larger problem in our justice system. Behind her, families of previously sentenced juveniles held up photos of their children. Parents stepped forward to share their stories with reporters, describing how their children had received harsh sentences for minor offenses. Inside her office at the Equal Justice Initiative, Maya's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Major news networks were requesting exclusive interviews. Law schools wanted her to speak to their students. Civil rights organizations from across the country were calling to offer support and resources. CNN is on line 1, her assistant called out. MSNBC on line 2, and Good Morning America wants you for tomorrow's show. Maya's parents watched proudly from the corner of the office as their daughter handled the media frenzy with remarkable poise. Her father, the longtime civil rights activist, wiped tears from his eyes as he watched the news coverage. "Look at what our baby girl has done," he whispered to his wife, who squeezed his hand tightly. Social media influencers picked up the story, creating viral videos that broke down Maya's investigation. Hashtag Justice for All and hashtag Teen Lawyer became trending topics worldwide. Young people especially connected with the story, seeing Maya as an inspiration and proof that age was no barrier to fighting for change. Local news stations began digging deeper, interviewing former defendants from Judge Harrison's court. Their stories painted a disturbing picture of systematic discrimination that had gone unchecked for years. "He told me I was worthless," one young man told reporters, his voice shaking. "Said I'd end up dead or in prison. Instead, I'm in college now, no thanks to him." The state's Judicial Review Board called an emergency meeting. The pressure was mounting as politicians and civil rights leaders demanded action. Judge Harrison's past cases were being scrutinized, and other judges across the state began facing similar investigations. National civil rights leaders flew in to stand with Maya. The Reverend James Thompson, a veteran of the civil rights movement, embraced her before the cameras. "This young woman," he declared, "has done more in 2 days to expose judicial racism than many have accomplished in years of trying." Legal experts appeared on news shows, analyzing Maya's brilliant strategy. She didn't just expose bias. One commentator explained, she documented it scientifically, legally, and irrefutably. "This is a masterclass in civil rights litigation." Maya's story particularly resonated with young people of color. Social media filled with messages from teens sharing their own experiences with the justice system. Hashtag MayaInspired became another trending hashtag as young people expressed their dreams of following in her footsteps. Late that evening, Maya sat in her office, watching the news coverage on multiple screens. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget to eat dinner, sweetheart. You're changing the world, but you still need to take care of yourself." She smiled, realizing she hadn't eaten since morning. The day had been a whirlwind, but this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more investigations, more chances to push for change. On her desk lay hundreds of letters that had already arrived from across the country. Young people writing to thank her, parents sharing stories of their children's experiences, law students asking for mentorship. The final news report of the day showed Judge Harrison leaving the courthouse, surrounded by reporters. He had no comment, but his face told the story. The once powerful judge now looked defeated, his reputation in tatters. As night fell over the city, Maya knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for now, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate what had been accomplished. The media storm wasn't just about exposing one biased judge. It was about shining a light on a broken system and inspiring others to stand up and fight for change. The revolution she had started was being broadcast on every channel, and there was no turning back now. The State Judicial Review Board convened in a grand hearing room, its mahogany walls and high ceiling lending gravity to the proceedings. Judge Harrison sat alone at a table, a stark contrast to his usual elevated position on the bench. Across from him, Maya Washington arranged her documents with methodical precision. The 7-member board, composed of senior judges and legal experts, looked down from their elevated platform. The room was packed with observers, journalists, and affected families. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Maya rose, her young face serious but composed. "Members of the board, what we present today isn't just about statistics or isolated incidents. This is about a pattern of behavior that has damaged countless young lives." She began methodically presenting her evidence. Security footage showed Judge Harrison's different treatment of white and minority defendants. Audio recordings captured his condescending remarks. Graphs and charts illustrated the stark disparities in sentencing. In this case, Maya pointed to one file. Two 17-year-old boys were charged with identical offenses, skateboarding in a restricted area. The white defendant received a warning. The black defendant received 30 days in juvenile detention. Judge Harrison shifted uncomfortably as case after case was presented. 8. We have reviewed every juvenile case in Judge Harrison's court over the past 5 years, she continued. The pattern is undeniable. Former defendants began testifying. A young Hispanic woman described being sent to detention for a minor shoplifting offense while her white friend received community service. A black teenager recounted how Judge Harrison had lectured him about thuggish behavior for a simple noise violation. During a break in proceedings, reporters caught footage of Judge Harrison slumped in his chair, his former arrogance replaced by desperate resignation. His attorney could be heard whispering, "Maybe we should consider a settlement." Maya's team brought forward expert witnesses, statisticians who confirmed the bias in sentencing patterns, psychologists who explained the lasting trauma of discriminatory treatment, and civil rights attorneys who placed Harrison's actions in the broader context of systemic racism. Your Honor, Maya addressed the board. We're not just asking for Judge Harrison's removal. We're requesting a complete review of every case where bias may have affected sentencing. The testimony continued into the evening. Parents spoke about watching their children's futures derailed by harsh sentences. Community leaders described the ripple effects of discriminatory justice on entire neighborhoods. Judge Harrison finally took the stand in his own defense, but his explanations rang hollow. I was simply enforcing the law, he insisted, but Maya's cross-examination exposed the inconsistencies in his statements. Is it enforcing the law? She asked. When you sentence minority youth to detention 3 times more frequently than white youth for the same offenses. The board members exchanged glances as Harrison struggled to respond. His previous confidence had evaporated under the weight of the evidence. As the hearing neared its end, Maya delivered her closing statement. This reckoning isn't just about one judge, it's about acknowledging that justice must be truly blind. Every young person who enters a courtroom deserves fair treatment, regardless of their race or appearance. The board announced they would review all evidence before making their final decision, but the writing was on the wall. Judge Harrison's career was effectively over. Outside the hearing room, families gathered around Maya, sharing tearful hugs and words of gratitude. Her parents watched proudly as their daughter handled each interaction with grace and empathy. This is just the beginning, Maya told reporters afterward. We've identified similar patterns in other courts. This case opens the door for broader reform. Late that night, as Maya packed up her files, she found a note slipped under her office door. It was from a young girl who had attended the hearing. Thank you for showing us that we can fight back. You made me want to become a lawyer too. Maya smiled, thinking about how this reckoning would ripple through the justice system. Judge Harrison's case would set precedents, forcing other judges to examine their own biases. The next morning's headlines would tell the story. Judge Harrison's career ends in disgrace. Teen lawyer transforms juvenile justice. Landmark hearing exposes systemic bias. But for Maya, the real headline was yet to be written. The story of hundreds of young lives that would now have a chance at true justice, and a system that would be forced to change, one courtroom at a time. The reckoning had come, and the old ways of dispensing justice would never be the same. 1 year after the historic hearing that exposed Judge Harrison's discriminatory practices, the landscape of juvenile justice in the state had transformed dramatically. Maya Washington stood in the newly renovated courthouse lobby, now named the Equal Justice Center, watching as young lawyers and social workers hurried through security. The changes were both physical and systemic. Gone were the intimidating wooden panels and stern portraits of past judges. Instead, the walls displayed artwork created by local youth and informational posters explaining legal rights in multiple languages. A help desk staffed by volunteer law students provided guidance to families navigating the system. Ms. Washington called out a familiar voice. It was Derek, one of Judge Harrison's former defendants, now a pre-law student at the state university. I got accepted into the summer internship program. Maya smiled warmly, remembering how Durrick's case had been one of many reviewed and overturned after Harrison's removal. Instead of serving time in detention, he had received mentoring and educational support. Now he was helping other young people navigate the system. The Equal Justice Initiative, under Maya's leadership, had expanded into a full-fledged legal advocacy center. Young attorneys from across the country applied to work there, inspired by her example. The waiting room was always full of families seeking help, but now they found hope instead of harassment. "We have the morning review meeting," her assistant reminded her. Maya nodded and headed to the conference room, where her team was gathering. The walls were covered with charts tracking sentencing patterns across the state, but now they showed improving trends toward equality. 6 months ago, we had significant disparities in these 3 counties, one of her attorneys reported, pointing to the data. After implementing our monitoring program, the gap has decreased by 60%. The meeting was interrupted by breaking news on the monitor. The state Supreme Court had just announced a complete review of all juvenile cases from the past decade, citing Maya's work as the catalyst for change. Later that afternoon, Maya visited the Juvenile Detention Center, not to meet clients, but to teach a law class. The facility had been transformed into an educational center, with classrooms replacing cells. Young people who might have been serving time were instead studying for their futures. "Remember," she told her students, "the law is meant to protect everyone equally. Your past doesn't define your future." As she left the center, Maya received a text from her father. Judge Harrison had been spotted working at a community legal aid clinic, providing free services as part of his own journey of redemption. The man who once dispensed harsh justice was learning about compassion and equality firsthand. The local bar association had created a scholarship in Maya's name, specifically for young people of color interested in civil rights law. The first batch of recipients was already making waves in law schools across the state. That evening, Maya attended a community meeting where parents, teachers, and legal professionals gathered to discuss further reforms. The atmosphere was hopeful, collaborative, a far cry from the fear and intimidation that once characterized the juvenile justice system. "We've made progress," Maya addressed the group, "but our work isn't finished. Every child deserves a justice system that sees them as a person, not a statistic." As she drove home that night, Maya passed the old courthouse where she had confronted Judge Harrison. The building now housed a youth advocacy center, its windows bright with activity even in the evening hours. Her phone buzzed with a message from a colleague in another state, asking for help implementing similar reforms. Maya's model of change was spreading, inspiring others to challenge systemic bias in their own communities. At home, Maya found a letter from a young girl who had attended one of her speaking events. "You showed me that one person can change the system," the girl had written. "I used to be scared of courts and judges. Now, I want to be one." Maya smiled, thinking about how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The change she had sparked wasn't just about reforming one courtroom or removing one biased judge. It was about transforming the entire concept of juvenile justice. As she prepared for bed, Maya glanced at her calendar for tomorrow: meetings with legislators, training sessions for new judges, and a youth advocacy workshop. The revolution she had started was now a movement, growing stronger every day. The system was changing, one court at a time, one life at a time, and Maya Washington was leading the way toward a future where justice truly meant justice for all.